welcome to another session of Music Matters with Ev. And I am so pleased for the opportunity to interview someone who I consider one of the most positive people I know. And he's also a bit of a multi-talented person as well. So welcome, Jack Drewry.
Hello.
How are you, Jack?
Very well, very well. Thanks for having me. This is so exciting.
Well, thank you for taking the time out of your definitely busy days and spending some time with us so that we can get a look into who you are, what you do, and how you do the things that you do. Thank you very much. So without any further ado, Jack, please tell us, when did it start for you? When did you realize that you had something creatively that you wanted to share with the world?
Oh, well, I suppose I'm from a bit of a creative family. So my mum and dad met in the theatre. And my dad was always very musical, and my mum very creative. So I suppose just growing up, we would always sort of like sing songs and do, like play games and, all of that. So I think from quite a young age, I realized that I liked doing that sort of thing. But I definitely had ambitions growing up of like being an architect, and because we have a really good family friend who's an architect, and at one point I was like, yes, I'm going to be an architect and do that. And then there's a thing that it really helps if you're very good at drawing to be an architect, and I'm not so good at that. I'm not a natural drawer. So doing music and theatre stuff, and with my dad being an actor, for a long time I wanted to be an actor, and then I kind of realized that actually music was the thing that I settled down into. But it's interesting. I've ended up doing music, but I actually studied theatre. So a lot of my work is doing music for theatre. So I have sort of drifted around sound, music, and the theatre world so far.
Okay. So what was the first instrument that you started to master?
Well, at school, it was the trumpet. They were offering trumpet lessons at school, and I really liked the sound of it because I thought it was a really cool instrument. And the only problem, the reason why that never stuck, is because it's physically difficult to get a note out. You're literally like, it's like there's a lot of effort per note. So I very quickly gravitated to the piano after that. But my dad was always a guitarist, so many times I've tried to play the guitar, and I dabble in the guitar, but there's quite a lot. With the piano, the amount of effort per note is very minimal, but for guitar, is a little bit more. So I realized I'm quite lazy. The easier it is to get to something that works, the better for me.
And I know you, so I know that you're a multi-instrumentalist. So what brought that out? Because I mean, piano and guitar are kind of like stable bases to start with, but then why did you decide to increase on the number of instruments that you were proficient on?
I think it's all about saying yes to things. So growing up, we went, a really good family friend called Bridget, she took us to this festival called Tribe of Doris, where it's sort of like a summer camp, and you learn lots of instruments and do like dancing and singing. And one of the sessions was djembe drumming, and so I really enjoyed that. And we went for 3 years, and I sort of kept going back. And so hand percussion was actually probably like the next thing I took a bit more seriously than just playing the piano. And then I think growing up, it was a lot of people were like, getting flashy clothes and things like that, and I always wanted like a new musical instrument. So I eventually managed to convince my mum to get me a drum kit, and then I learned the drum kit a bit as well. But yeah, I think that I wouldn't say, when people say what do, I don't think I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I wouldn't think of myself like that, because I know what I don't know. So I know that I'm not that great on each instrument, but I can bodge through and make something work. And then often, you know, if you're not very good at the guitar, but you can play a chord and you know what rhythm you want it to be, I then record all that on my computer and chop it up and make myself sound better than I actually am at those instruments, I'd say.
I think you're very modest, Jack. And I understand what you mean about chopping up and improving the overall sound or the final sound on technological basis. All right, so what about then if you were very instrumental, excuse the pun, in music when you're growing up? What about the typical sort of band, sort of teenager activity of being in a band and things like that? Did you get involved in that?
Yes. So growing up, I was never in like a rock band. You know, people have those garage bands where you rock up and you plug in your amp. We formed a through Remix, which was based at the Colston Hall. We formed a jazz band, which originally started as a jam session, a jazz jamming session, and then over time it formed slowly into what became Spinal Jazz, which was this which was like a kind of we had a couple of reviews of our live gigs, and one of them they described us as amoebic proto-funk, which we couldn't really work out if it was a compliment, because we were about 15 at the time, so we were like, okay. But what we all came to realize was that we weren't really that good at our instruments, but we knew how to jam and like bodge together making different things, and all of our songs ended up being small little loops of like really funky grooves, but we didn't really know how to structure songs, so we just take this one funky loop and then go, okay, do these wild transitions and then end up in a different loop. And so it wasn't kind of like traditional jazz, it was super avant-garde, and nobody else was really doing that as kids. So we'd go to these like Battle of the Band sessions, and everybody else would be playing, you know, rock or ska or some kind of thing that was really catchy, and we'd come in with these like really catchy riffs, but they were just completely bonkers. We actually did win a Battle of the Bands one time.
I'm not surprised.
We won a giant banana, an inflatable banana.
Oh, dear. Again, you're being very modest, because after hearing Spinal Jazz, I just thought to myself, these guys are on it. These guys are definitely on it. So, yeah, and you did have a bit of a following, I know.
Yeah, we played a few little like Bristol festivals. We played at Ashton Court, and actually we were due to play at Ashton Court the day it was rained off, and then never went on again. So we were lined up to play at the festival that never was.
So that's a nice way to start a story. That's a nice title for a story.
The festival that never was.
So then how did you then move into the profession that you studied at uni? How did you move into that?
Well, I think throughout the, you know, doing Remix and doing Spinal Jazz, I'd always been also doing the Bristol Old Vic Young Company, and learning about theatre. And my parents met at the Bristol Old Vic, so the idea of doing theatre was very much happening in parallel with music. And because my approach to music was not very that's like too many superlatives, because I never learned to read music properly. I kind of approached things by ear and did much more chord theory, and from a kind of not really a compositional background. I was nervous about the idea of going to study music. So I also was super into making theatre and acting and directing. So I think there's something about theatre where it allows you to pull together lots of different art forms: dance, music, storytelling, writing, and performing. And so I thought, at the time, I really wanted to be a theatre director, and so I went to do a drama degree in Belfast at Queen's University Belfast, and that felt like it would be able to encompass a lot of different things, and I learned a lot. I didn't actually end up doing that much music. I met a few people outside, and we outside of the course, and we did some little bits and bobs, but I'd never found my spinal jazz. It's funny, during that time, I started noticing a friend of mine, Gavin, who was the bass player in Spinal Jazz. He showed me Snarky Puppy, the jazz band, and I thought, if we had carried on playing our instruments and we were actually really, really good, we could have been Snarky Puppy. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I totally agree. Absolutely, that's a really good concept.
Yeah.
So who knows then? You know, maybe in the future, when Snarky Puppy are hanging up their instruments, Spinal Jazz may be reforming
to fill that void.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, what an awesome thought.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the I also felt like if there was times when doing music, I could find myself getting a bit fed up and like studying music. I never did music A level, but I did the GCSE, and there were times where I found it a little bit of a slog. And I never got bored of theatre because it's always it's such a multifaceted challenge. So I thought I'll go and study that, and then I can always do music alongside and keep that going. And it turns out they ended up combining.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And when you speak about the comparison between straight music or studying music and studying drama, it so fits in with someone of your talent and ability, because when you have many facets that you can turn to, you don't want to get bogged down in one. It's not in your nature to get bogged down in one.
I suppose so, yeah.
So that's why you naturally gravitate towards the one that will give you the endless variation of choices. So well done. So take us up to then, because I know that in fact, tell us a little bit more about your productions, because I've seen a couple of your dramatic productions or stuff that you've directed. So tell us, how did that go? Did you take anything abroad in Europe or touring or the Fringe and so on?
So just after I finished the drama degree, I came back to Bristol, moved back home, and then I started doing this course that they run out of the Bristol Vic Young Company. It's still going, and it's called Made in Bristol, and it's a course where young theatre makers, either before or after university, can come together and kind of learn how to make their own theatre. It's devised theatre. There's no scripts. And you learn about workshop leading and applying all those skills to running workshops and helping the young company run. And so out of that, I learned a lot. We made a show. Unfortunately, the show never made it to Edinburgh. There was a bit of there was a lot of stress around that, and we never made it to Edinburgh. But in the last weeks of the course, I was sort of offered a job to be an assistant director on a show called The Boy Who Cried Wolf, which was an outside theatre show. And then during that process, I auditioned to be the bear in We're Going on a Bear Hunt, which is the children's show, the adaptation of the Michael Rosen book. And doing that job as the bear, you're actually the stage manager and the understudy and the bear. So throughout the show, you run around picking up props and solving the whole thing. Being backstage and making the show run, and then at the very end, you put on a bear costume, come out, and you sort of take all the glory and get to be the bear that they're looking for. So with that, it was this huge, big touring show, and it went on an international tour, and I went with it to Australia, which is absolutely bonkers. I'd never even been on a tour. I'd never been on a tour of anything, even in the UK, and I'd ended up going to Australia, which was
My
absolutely
goodness
crazy.
me.
But what it really made me realize, I love this type of theatre. It was the director, Sally Cookson. She's super innovative at making really fun theatre for kids that's accessible for adults. But doing somebody else's show made me realize, no, I want to make my own work. So when after that tour, I came back and I brought together some people who I'd done the course with and various other people, and we made a company called Tremelo Theatre. And we developed our first show, which was called The Hours Before We Wake. And it was an exploration of lucid dreaming in a kind of like a dystopian sci-fi world. And I've always loved sci-fi, like science and ideas and sci-fi films. So we made this show that's about, it's set in a future in which a pill has been invented that allows you to control your dreams and upload them to the internet. So it's this sort of like super sci-fi world, and we did it quite a pared down stage setting, but with lots of sound design. So we worked with a composer and sound designer called Rowan Evans, who we worked with to make this sort of really rich sound world. And then, so that was my own work, but then I ended up working on a family theatre show called The Star Seekers, which we originally made it above a pub in Kingsdown. And this was for 3 to 8 year olds. We made it as a co-production between the Wardrobe Ensemble and the Wardrobe Theatre. It's confusing because they're two separate entities. One's the company and one's a venue. But this was the first time the two things had actually made a show together. And we made the Star Seekers, which is like an interactive space adventure for kids. And originally I was just brought on to make the music, but they were like, Jack, we sort of imagined there'd be 3 characters. So do you want to play a character? So
great.
That project ended up doing really well, and we toured it around the country. We made a second show called the Deep Sea Seekers, which was an interactive. No, sorry, the second show was called the Time Seekers, which is an interactive like sort of history adventure, teaching kids about history, and then. For some crazy reason, we took it to Edinburgh. We struggled a little bit for audiences in Edinburgh. We did manage to get lots of venues to book a tour. And then somehow we were invited to go in the summer of 2018 to the National Theatre and do it at the National Theatre for a whole month.
Wow.
Which was completely insane. So, and yeah, this tiny little show basically ended up doing quite a lot. Since then, we've made another show called the Deep Sea Seekers, and we were in the middle of touring that when the pandemic kicked off.
Right. So, and right on point, because I was going to ask, what happened for you then with all your creative pursuits when 2020 hit? What happened?
Well, so I had been working as sound designer for a composer called Verity Standen, who's an absolutely brilliant. I don't know if you've ever met her. She's a self-taught sort of musical genius. She does a cappella music and teaches community choirs and choirs to kind of make their own music. And we were working on this show called Undersong, where the audience sit in the middle and the choir move amongst the audience singing this really intricate music. We'd done it in May at Mayfest the previous year, and we were like gearing up to do the show and to do a big national tour. And the pandemic sort of started creeping around, and we were like, okay, we'll still sort of plan for all this to happen because we don't know what's going to happen. And then effectively a week before we went into lockdown, the production team came to us and said, we don't feel comfortable about having this show carry on because it's all about bringing people of all different ages all together in a really intimate space, which is the perfect thing for theatre, but also unfortunately the perfect thing for spreading COVID-19. So we had to cancel that show, and it was this sort of case of like a domino effect. We were cancelled the first batch of shows, and then there were things in the future lined up. And as we realized this was going to be a big problem, those things started getting cancelled, the things that were further and further away. And some fairly exciting and big projects got cancelled. Hopefully those things will happen again, because those partnerships and those relationships are still there. But basically everything closed down because the theatre and the performance industry just totally ground to a halt. But what we realized is that we'd freed up all this time, especially because we were touring the Deep Sea Seekers. We had a couple of blocks of weeks that everybody had freed up. So we spent that time converting those 3 children's shows that are interactive into a podcast.
Oh, well done.
So instead of with the stage show, there's a lot of improvisational elements. So the kids would be asked, for example, oh, there's a planet. The vastness of space is infinite. So there could be a planet made out of anything. It could be made out of socks. It could be made out of chocolate. What's the planet made of? We've discovered it. We get to, imagine what it could be. And so you'd ask them for that, and then you'd ask them for different things, and then we'd sort of improvise a song that would rhyme with those lyrics, or we'd land on the planet and say, what's the ground made of? And kids from the audience would come up with all these crazy ideas that we'd fold into the show. So for the podcast, the way that works is we interview kids and get their ideas, and then they are like the computer of the ship. So we go, oh, computer, what do you think about this? And then we get a kid's voice that is that thing that we can then interact with. But there's a lot of music in the shows, but what's fun about the podcast is it gives you this opportunity to just do one really satisfying educational song for kids. So we've done one about tectonic plates when we did the volcano episode. The most recent one, which just went up a couple of days ago, is about bird migration. So we did one about bird migration and the journey that a cuckoo takes to go from the UK to the Congo River. And yeah, there's all kinds of things. I'm working on the final episode at the moment.
That sounds fantastic. And it just goes to show that regardless of restrictions or restraints, even unforeseen restraints and restrictions, the creatives find other ways.
Yeah. So I think what was useful for that project was that because we'd done those various shows and toured around a bit, we partnered up with a few venues that we'd been back to a few times, and they said, yeah, we've got some funding, from the Culture Recovery Fund or different things. We'll give you a little pot of money, and then you can use that to develop a couple of episodes of the podcast. And so we managed to scramble together little pots of money here and there to pay us all to keep going. And then once we'd done a few episodes, a funding bid went through to do like a second season, and also to commission an illustrator to help us sort of illustrate an activity book and to illustrate a sort of a music video for one of the songs. So the idea being that we want to try and take these characters that were originally stage show characters and push them forwards. I mean, the dream would be to like get them onto CBBC or something like that, But I think animation is probably the way that can work, so that we can do wild ideas. like shrinking down tiny and going inside the human body. That's what we did for episode 4, for example.
Oh, that's so cool. Wow. Excellent. So therefore it wasn't necessarily the hold up that many other people experienced.
I think for that project, actually, it gave us the space to be able to reimagine how we could do it. And we'd actually, before the pandemic, we'd actually been thinking, wouldn't it be fun? How can we get this to more people? Because there's something about theatre which is, I always think theatre is to sort of film like live music is to a recording. So theatre's super intimate, and it's really hard. You know, the kids and families who come to see our shows enjoy it, but how do we get that to a wider audience? And actually, the pandemic allowed us some time to rethink that. There's also not. For that particular project, we managed to find a way to make it work. There were a lot of other projects that had to stop, so it's not all fun and games, but we've managed to find ways to keep that particular project sort of rolling, which has been really good.
Oh, that's excellent. So, what do you think? What do you see of the near future then? How does things look in your imagination?
Well, so a thing that I regularly do is play piano for an improvised soap opera that happens at the Wardrobe Theatre every other Monday night. And the first sort of live performance thing that I'm involved in that will likely start up is that. And I'm not sure, I think it's at some point in May or June that theatres and performance venues are allowed to bring in half audiences. So that will be the first sort of thing that starts to get back to normal. There's a couple of little funding bids for various projects sort of in the pipeline that may come to fruition. But my next actual project is I am doing the sound design for a series of 6 radio plays that are a collaboration between documental theatre and National Prison Radio. So it was originally going to be 3 plays, but it's actually now that they managed to get more funding, so it's actually going to be 6 plays written by 6 different writers from around the country, and then recorded, some recorded remotely, some recorded on location, and then I will be pulling those together, working with a brilliant composer called Benjamin Kwesi Burrell. And he's going to be making the music. I'll be editing the voices and pulling together the sound design, and then we'll have these 6 radio plays.
Excellent.
Oh, and also with another project that's a bit more musical in nature is Verity Standen, the composer who I was working with the moment the pandemic hit, is doing an R&D for a new project. She wants to explore like choral singing, ASMR, which is like the very intimate recordings, and binaural sound. And so we are going to do a very COVID secure R&D, which is R&D is like research and development, just for anyone who doesn't know what shorthand is. It's usually when you have an idea for a project, but you don't know really quite what it is yet. So you get a bunch of creatives together and you test out the idea. Will this work? Is it going to be funny if it's supposed to be funny? Is it going to be emotional if it's supposed to be emotional? Will the music work? How does the technology work? And so you can test out a load of things before you then go, okay, this is what it will be. It's sort of a rehearsal process without the need to perform at the end. The outcome is learning what you want to make.
Excellent. So what advice would you give to people who are thinking of, I have to ask you on 2 counts now because you're in 2 camps. What advice would you give to people who are thinking of becoming musically active? And also, what advice would you give to people who are thinking of becoming creatively active in terms of drama and theatre and things like that? What advice would you give them?
I think my main advice would be to say yes to as many things as you can. So get involved in projects at school. If there's, for example, at school, a guy came in to teach DJ lessons, and I thought, oh, that sounds fun. And I learned how to DJ and beat match. And it's very occasionally it comes in useful, but it's like those skills, just see if there's a project happening at school, if there's an extracurricular thing, you can go and learn something. I'd say try and soak up as much stuff as you can. And, I think the Bristol Music Trust have music things going on. Find some friends who you make good music with and record it. It's so, I think what I'm realizing increasingly is that when I was at school, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have things that you could just press record and you could make a recording. We had one dictaphone for this. It was like an 8-piece jazz band. We used to put this dictaphone in somebody's trumpet case so that it wasn't too loud, and then we'd listen back to it and go, "Oh, that was really good. Let's do that next week." And the way that band worked is we all said Wednesday evening is the evening we do that band. So I think if you want to form a band, it's quite good to commit one evening a week that you can all definitely do. And then if that becomes your regular thing, do it. And then something we realized about ourselves after quite a long time is we preferred making music much more than we ever really preferred performing. So we were deeply disorganized in terms of performing. But these days, smartphones, you could record yourself, edit together a nice video, and put it online. And I'd say that just making as much stuff as you can and putting it up online and trying it out is a great idea. And then when you get to a point, what people have said to me with music in the past is when you get to a point where you've got something really exciting that you want to release, a thing to do is to really refine what your sound is, and then take that sound and release it and push it. And so there's the two schools of thought where you go make loads of stuff and put it up online, and the other school of thought is keep making, but only put your very best stuff up online. And then you only put something up online that you're really proud of. But the process of learning to record and learning how to make music by yourself, the resources online are just vast. There's so much information, and in a way you've got to learn how to control the amount of information there is, because there's so much. There's a case for following particular YouTubers or reading particular magazines, or there's the other case where you just start making and start trying things out, explore recording. There's so many apps and there's so much software there that you can do, that you can start making music on, and the number of tools is almost overwhelming. So try and hone what you're good at, what you like, and then find ways to collaborate with other people. Learning how to collaborate is really good. And then explore creatively what's exciting for you. You know, if all your friends are making like beats on their laptops, but you've never resonated with that, you'd rather learn how to play intricate guitar, put your time into that. Like I think look at what's going on around you and decide what is exciting to you. And if you don't see it there, try and work out what that is. What music do you like listening to? Do you not really like making music, but you really love listening to lots and lots of different music? And maybe you should learn how to DJ and and get a little mixer and decide. And when we can do performances again, like try just finding places where you can choose the music. And that's really all DJing is. It's choosing music.
Excellent. On the creative and dramatic side, the theatre side?
Yes. So in Bristol, there's a couple of really good places to go. So Travelling Light Theatre Company run drama workshops, and they're based in Barton Hill. They're fantastic. The Bristol Vic Young Company, absolutely fantastic. Couldn't recommend it enough. If you're interested in theatre and performance, get involved in the Young Company. There's their Tobacco Factory have a Young Company as well, and but also both the Tobacco Factory and the Bristol Vic have adult companies where you can do all the same things as the Young Company, but it's an older age group, and you can learn skills in different ways. And I think wherever you are in the country, have a look at your local theatres, because there's a lot of focus on theatres finding outreach departments. That's what it's called, like outreach or engagement. So in Bath, they've got Egg Theatre in Bath and the Bath Theatre Royal have engagement programs where they work with kids to make shows. And the workshops are generally, how these courses generally work is it's weekly workshops where you learn about performance, you do a little bit of acting, play some drama games, and then you do sort of workshops. But then every few months or a few times a year, there'll be a show, and you audition for the show, or you find out what roles are going. Sometimes there'll be technical things, and sometimes there'll be performance things. And then doing a show with a youth theatre, you learn so much, like about how it works, how the rehearsal process, what the tech rehearsals are like. I love tech rehearsals. I think they're the most exciting thing. But it's a very specific beast. You've done all your rehearsals, and you go into the theatre, and then you have to rehearse the technical elements, and you don't get to do that in the workshops. You'll only really learn about that side of it if you do a show with the youth theatre or the young company. Yeah, and then the other thing as well is that's very much the theatre side, but there's a lot of people making sort of sketch comedy and forming little comedy troupes with their mates and putting those online and getting good at video editing or animation or whatever you're interested in. There's never been a better time to learn new things. Like, so yeah, I think keep learning, keep saying yes to as many projects as you possibly can.
Yeah, Jack, that is fantastic to hear you say that. And thank you for that. And I'm going to share with you something that really proves what you're saying, because I so vividly remember, Jack, when I was running the gospel choir at Cotton for many, many years. And the gospel choirs predominantly were filled with female students. There was the odd one or two male students who would be part of the choir. And then I vividly remember that day when we were rehearsing in the upstairs performance room, and you and your friends were outside the door looking in, wondering if you could come in and join. You pushed the door and said, "Is it okay if we just come in?" And I said, come. Because it was like 4 or 5 guys. I was thinking, yes. And I testify that after that time when you guys joined, that was when, do you remember after that we did the St. George's choir thing? And then we actually took part in the BBC choir competition, and all those different things that we were able to do simply because we had a greater contingency of male vocals in this predominantly female gospel choir.
It was me and my friends knocking at the door, being like, "That sounds amazing. We want to do that."
So thank you. And you are absolutely right. Get involved in as many different things that you see to get involved in, and you're a testament to that. So well done. Jack, we're so grateful for you giving us this interview. I've just got one more question, and it's just basically a tongue-in-cheek scenario. If the year 2020 was a human being, what would you say to him or her?
I'd say we have learnt a lot about you. You've maybe created some incredibly difficult situations. You've created a lot of chaos. Lots of terrible things have happened in the world, but we will learn from you, and we will be much better prepared for next time. But yes, 2020, you can go now.
Absolutely. All right. Do you know what? I just want to find out from you now. Well done. How can people get in touch with you, get to know what you're doing, keep in touch with your performances, your productions, etc., etc.? Have you got a website? I know you're a part of the theatre company.
Yeah, so I've got, my website is just jackdrewry.com. I managed to blag the straight up. Yeah. And my Twitter is at Jack Drewry. And I think of all the platforms, really, at the moment, Twitter's the one I'm looking at the most.
Okay.
But
Good.
yes.
Yep.
On my website, I'm involved in a lot of projects at the same time, but most of the things that happen, I'll sort of talk about on Twitter, probably. I'll retweet the things.
Okay. And on your website, we can get notice of the theatre companies and other projects that you're involved in.
Yeah. There's a list of the various things, but it's Tremelo Theatre. We've got a couple of little projects in the pipeline. The Wardrobe Ensemble and the Seekers podcast that's where you can hear, like, that's really my main creative output for the year of 2020 was on the Seekers podcast, and that's on all the podcast platforms. And it's really fun for adults, but it's really aimed at sort of 3 to 8, but maybe all the way up to like 10. But they're really silly, funny stories that we try and make fun for adults as well.
Wow. Well, Jack Drewry, thank you again for your time. We wish you all the best with your
absolute pleasure
processes, and we will be making contact again because this has been fun. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Really nice to see you.
All right. You take care. Until next time.
Take care. Bye.